Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Zinclea Samoa in for Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, guilty. Dramatic developments as the double murder trial of Alec Murdaugh comes to a close. This morning, the disgraced lawyer now facing the possibility of life in prison. Jurors convicted him of murdering his wife and son after less than 3 hours of deliberation.
And our criminal justice system worked tonight. It gave a voice to Maggie and Paul Murdoch.
We have team coverage with more on the verdict and reaction from both sides as sentencing proceedings begin. Also this morning, wintry mess. Millions of Americans waking up to wild winter weather. Right now, a tornado watch is in effect across the south, while out west, people are digging out from several feet of snow. We're tracking the conditions and where that storm is heading next. Startling statistics from the American Cancer Society. More people are being diagnosed with colon cancer at a younger age. The new warning from health officials, plus the best practices to take care of your health. And we begin this morning in South Carolina, where disbarred attorney Alec Murdoch is set to be sentenced just this morning.
Yeah, last night a jury found him guilty in the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul.
The State versus Richard Alexander Murdoch, defendant. Indictment for murder. Verdict guilty. Signed by the forelady. Date 3/2/23.
After a 6-week trial, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before convicting Murdoch of 2 counts of murder plus 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Murdoch faces anywhere from 30 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole. We have our team here to help walk us through the latest on the Murdoch trial. Attorney and legal analyst Angela Sandella and NBC News legal analyst Glenn Kirshner are both standing by. But first, let's go to NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber, who is again outside the courthouse in Walterboro, South Carolina. Ellison, good morning. So first of all, let's talk about the reaction. How are both the prosecution and the defense responding to this verdict, especially the fact that it came back so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, the jury deliberated 2 hours and 51 minutes. That's when we found out they had a verdict. Alec Murdoch was placed in handcuffs in court and walked out through the back door. It was about an hour after that when we heard prosecutors react to this verdict. They said that justice was served. Listen.
It is a good day in South Carolina. Today's verdict proves that no one, no matter who you are in society, is above the law. A lot of people doubted that this process would work, and hopefully, for those who did doubt the process, hopefully we have instilled and put a little bit of faith back into you and your lives.
This verdict backed fast. Joe, the defense team has not put out an official statement yet, but Jim Griffin, the defense attorney who delivered the closing remarks on behalf of Alec Murdoch and his team, he told reporters as he was leaving the courthouse that they were disappointed in the verdict, but wouldn't have a comment until sentencing. That is going to happen later today. We expect court to get started at about 9:30 this morning.
Yeah,
Joe.
and Ellison, before the actual sentence is handed down, the court is expected to hear victim impact statements. Do we know at this point who's actually going to be speaking?
No, we don't. But South Carolina is a little bit unique. They do this in some other states as well. I think most recently people will remember it taking place in some high-profile cases in Michigan. But they have this thing that's commonly known as allocution, where in this state, any victim who has been entered into evidence in a case, has been mentioned in the trial, they have the right to make a victim statement to the court. So you think of this case, 6 weeks, how many witnesses, how many documents of evidence? There are potentially a lot of victims who would be able to make a statement if they choose to do so. Exactly how many, how long it will be, that we do not know at this point. But in this state as well, after those victim statements are made, the defendant has the opportunity to address the court as well. Then the judge will make his decision on sentencing. Remember, when it comes to the most serious charges here, those 2 counts of murder, that has a mandatory minimum of 30 years. The maximum is life in prison. Joe.
And Ellison, we know that cases don't end with verdicts and sentences. Can we expect anything else in this case after today?
Right. So we won't know for sure until we hear more directly from Murdoch's defense team. But just looking back at the trial and thinking of the moments where they had a lot of contention, issues, questions with what was happening, they will most likely appeal. There was a lot of debate over the decision to enter his alleged financial crimes into this trial. He's facing 99 counts of financial charges separately. So the defense will probably look at something like that and likely file some sort of motion to appeal moving forward. They did ask the judge yesterday, after this verdict was delivered, to declare a mistrial. He said no, that he thought the jury had the amount of evidence to make this appropriate decision and that they had done so. But certainly we can probably expect to see some sort of appeal moving forward from Alec Murdaugh's defense team.
All right, Ellison Barber. Ellison, thank you.
Now let's bring in our two legal analysts for more on this. Attorney Angela Sandella and former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. Thank you both for being here. So, Angela, let's start with you. As we just heard, the jury only took about 3 hours or 2 hours, 51 minutes to deliver a guilty verdict. Notable in part because there were nearly 800 pieces of evidence to consider, and they heard from over 70 witnesses. So what does that tell you about how the jury came to this decision and the sentiments overall?
I was surprised at just how swift this decision came, given how complex and long and drawn out the trial was. To me, what that indicates is that the jury in deliberations did not spend a lot of time arguing about their closing arguments. Personally, I found both the defense and prosecution closings to be very strong, compelling, filled with very interesting debates. But to me, this means that when Alec Murdaugh was on that stand and he delivered his testimony, when he delivered those tears, that is what swayed the jury one way or the other. And clearly here, it seems it swayed in favor of the prosecution.
And Glenn, I want to bring you in. What piece of evidence stood out to you in this trial that may have led the jury to come to this verdict? And how would you assess the prosecution strategy overall?
Yeah, you know, Sinclair, there was a mountain of circumstantial evidence against Alec Murdaugh. No one piece of circumstantial evidence tends to prove a case on its own. You know, when you have a case that's based on circumstantial evidence, it really is like assembling a puzzle, and the picture only emerges after you sort of put all of the puzzle pieces in place. One thing I found pretty compelling was that the murders were accomplished with two guns, a rifle and a shotgun, and one of those guns was a Murdaugh family gun, right? So it's really hard to conceive of somebody going out to a remote ranch intending to kill multiple people and saying to himself, you know, I think I'll just rummage around when I'm out there and try to find a murder weapon. You know, those kind of facts make absolutely no sense. What I think sealed the deal is when Murdaugh took the stand and said, basically, I've been a liar all my life. I've looked my clients in the eyes and I've lied to them. My law firm partners, I've lied to them. My family and the authorities in this case. So what Murdaugh told the jury is that when my self-interest is involved, I will lie. I can't imagine there was a juror in the jury box gullible enough to believe that when his liberty is at stake, that's when he's going to start telling the truth. I think that's why the jury returned its verdict in really record time, under 3 hours after a 6-week trial.
And I mean, even with those admissions of lies during the closing arguments yesterday, we heard an emphasis on reasonable doubt from the defense. So, Angela, I wonder, is there any chance Murdaugh's team could appeal this conviction? And if so, on what grounds could they file that appeal?
I think absolutely they will be filing an appeal. We've seen the aggressiveness from this defense team, and due to the severity of the sentencing, absolutely we're going to see appeal. Colloquially, when you see a judge make a decision that people are questioning, that is usually what the defense team will use for grounds for appeal. Here, it's undoubtedly the financial motive being brought in as evidence in this trial. So this evidence was not supposed to be brought in to show propensity that because of this he would commit more crimes, but I am going to go out on a limb and say that's what his defense team is going to base their appeal on.
Glenn, briefly here, we know Murdaugh is set to receive his sentence. Prosecutors indicate they will seek life in prison without the possibility of parole. Do you expect the judge to side with prosecution? Briefly.
You know, how is it that if you kill your wife and your son, you haven't earned spending the rest of your life in prison? I mean, to protect the community, to vindicate the rights of the victims, I feel like we are likely to see a very stiff sentence and perhaps life without the possibility of parole.
Important analysis from you both, Angela Sandella and Glenn Kirshner. Thank you so much.
Time now for weather and storms causing some serious damage overnight. Strong storms moved through Texas, knocking down store facades onto cars parked out front. Golf ball-sized hail covered the ground in some neighborhoods. In one city, there was a report of a possible tornado touching down. This morning, more than 100,000 people are without power.
Also this morning in the southeast, residents from Tennessee to Louisiana are waking up with a tornado watch and the threat of damaging winds and hail.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman joins us now with more. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. We continue tracking this same storm that started out in California, worked across the country. We've got one more-ish day to deal with this before we'll see it move out of the area and we'll be off to better weather. Here's what's going on, though. This March storm continues to march its way to the east. We've got a whole lot of impacts to deal with. We have the winter weather alerts that are stretched from parts of the Northeast into the Great Lakes. We've got flood alerts basically stretching from Ohio all the way down to Arkansas. And then we have the wind alerts that include 70 million people across the eastern half of the country, and not to mention a tornado watch that is in effect for a little while longer for parts of Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and a little sliver of Tennessee. It does include places like Memphis, Greenville. All of those locations could potentially see this strong line of thunderstorms working through and prompting the ingredients are all there, right, for any of these tornadoes to develop. And it's not just that area here as we go through the morning hours. It's going to be through the afternoon hours that we watch this system shift to the east, and we once again have that threat of strong storms, including tornadoes. It's not going to be quite as robust as it was yesterday, but the damaging wind, the hail, all impacts that we could see. And then we start to turn our attention to the cold side of this system, where we'll see some snow working into places like Detroit, which now has a winter storm warning up and could see anywhere from 5 to 9 inches of snow when this is all said and done. The higher elevations of parts of the north of New England, rather, will see some of those higher amounts of snow totals as well. But we also have rain. We have freezing rain that's going to be giving us a little bit of trouble when it comes to that afternoon commute in parts of the Northeast. Let's talk about that severe threat. It's really centered in over places like Lexington, Nashville, Chattanooga, but it does extend a little farther to the south. You can see 30 million people are included in this in the southeast. So again, another day where you want to have a way to get your warnings, your watches, if that severe weather could threaten your area. 22 million people in the meantime are under flood alerts because we've got a lot of rain working through. We've got saturated grounds. We could see anywhere from 1 to 2, maybe isolated amounts up to 3 inches of rain. So we'll watch for the flooding concerns through the day today. And I mentioned the wintry mix for parts of the Northeast, Hartford, Scranton, Buffalo, even as far south as Petersburg. We could see some of that ice accumulating up to 1/10 of an inch. So it'll be a little bit slick through the second half of our day and into early tomorrow. If you're looking for the snow, places like, the eastern half of Michigan, we could see a sliver of maybe 6 inches or so. 6 to 9 is possible, but in the higher elevations of New England, that's where we'll see the higher amounts. New York, if you're waiting for more snow, we're not getting it. I know that question's coming. And then out west, they just can't catch a break, guys. Another western storm works in, does bring snow across much of the country, at least the northern tier and out west through the weekend. But look at that warm sunshine, nice day set up for Sunday. That's what you want, right?
That's right. Yeah, I like to see that in the weekend.
Especially on a weekend.
Exactly.
Angie Lastman, thank you.
Turning to Capitol Hill, the House Ethics Committee has launched an investigation into embattled Republican Congressman George Santos. Yesterday, in a statement, the panel said that it's looking to determine whether Santos may have engaged in, quote, unlawful activity with respect to his 2022 congressional campaign, among other actions. NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us now with more on this. So, Julie, we know Santos has previously admitted to lying about his background. Walk us through who's on this panel and what exactly they're investigating.
Yeah, Joe, it's good to be with you. Look, in many ways, this was expected. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy sort of foreshadowed to this investigation back in early January. We know that actually 2 of Santos's Democratic colleagues from New York actually filed some of these complaints you see on your screen here. These are the things that this bipartisan panel will be investigating. 5 and 5, Republicans and Democrats equally divided. It is the most nonpartisan panel on Capitol Hill. You see some of that here. They're going to be looking into whether he engaged in unlawful activity during his 2022 congressional campaign. Also, whether he failed to properly disclose required filings with the House, violated federal conflict of interest laws, and even engaged in sexual misconduct toward an individual seeking employment in his office. That individual that was working for Santos for about a week on a volunteer basis who filed that complaint with the Ethics Committee and the U.S. Capitol Police a couple of weeks ago. But look, this is just one of the several investigations into Santos, and the outcome of which this investigation we may not know for quite some time. And remember, this is only a 2-year term for Santos. He said he has not decided on whether he will run again in 2024. So that'll be something to watch. But we really don't know when we'll hear from the Ethics Committee or when they'll find a conclusion on this.
Have we heard from Santos at all about this Ethics Committee investigation?
Yeah, his office and Santos himself don't tend to respond too much, but he did tweet after this ethics complaint was officially launched, after this ethics investigation was launched, saying, quote, "The House Committee on Ethics opened investigation and Congressman George Santos is fully cooperating. There will be no further comment made at this time." His office echoing those remarks as well. And we don't expect to hear much else from Santos. The House is also out today, so we're unable to sort of stake out his office and try to find him in the Capitol itself. And Santos is somebody who has ignored repeated questions from reporters. He admitted to lying and fabricating his resume, including his credentials by which he ran not only in 2022, but in the 2 years prior as well. And so we don't expect to hear much more from him. But again, this is something Speaker McCarthy said, let this investigation play out and see what happens.
And Julie, if the panel does find any wrongdoing, then what happens? What are the options on the table?
Well, look, again, Joe, this could take some time, right? It could take longer than Santos is even a congressman. So that's one of the problems here. But this body really doesn't have much weight to it other than a slap on the wrist at the end of the day. They can remove him from committee assignments, of which he's on 2 currently. He's stepped aside from them while these investigations are pending. So in all reality, he already distanced himself from the biggest thing they would probably take, including the House, of course, can vote to remove him from the House entirely. That is kind of unprecedented here. We haven't seen that happen too many times in the past. So all in all, most likely these outside investigations, including by the FBI and a prosecutor in New York and even somebody in Brazil looking into financial crimes, possibly, that's set to yield more likely consequences for Santos than even this ethics panel in the House, which, like I said, this could take a very long time to play out.
All right, Julie Sirkin. Julie, thank you so much.
Now to major developments and potential lawsuits against former President Donald Trump from the January 6th attack on the Capitol. According to a new court filing, the Justice Department says Trump can be sued by Capitol police officers and members of Congress for damages stemming from the January 6th riot. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian joins us now for more on this. Ken, good morning. So let's start with a closer look at this filing. At issue here is Trump's claim that as president, he is immune from lawsuits. But what is the Justice Department saying?
Good morning, Zinkley. Well, it's not just Trump's claim. Presidents are immune from civil lawsuits. That's a long-standing tenet of law. It's been a long-held Justice Department position. What's interesting and novel here is that the Justice Department, for the first time, has said that a president is not immune for certain conduct that is well outside the bounds of presidential authority, presidential action. That's what the Justice Department is saying about Donald Trump's speech on January 6th at the Ellipse, which these plaintiffs say incited the January 6th riot. The Justice Department is saying that was not presidential conduct. It had nothing to do with the presidency, and therefore Trump can be sued for those actions. Now, they're not taking a position on whether that statement was, in fact, incitement of the riot. They're just saying that they hold, it's their position, the Justice Department, that Trump can be sued. Now, again, they're not the final arbiter of this. This is a lawsuit that's going through the courts, but it's very significant that the Justice Department has taken this position, Zinkley.
And Ken, you just said it, right? It's actually up to the appeals court to rule on whether or not these lawsuits can move forward. So what more do we know about the lawsuits and when we can expect a ruling?
Right. Well, this is a specific lawsuit brought by some Capitol police officers and members of Congress. But this ruling notes that there are 5 other similar cases. So the implications here are profound. This particular lawsuit has already garnered a ruling by a federal district judge saying that, yes, in fact, Trump could be sued. And yes, in fact, that speech that he gave was incitement. Now it's in the appeals court. It may end up all the way to the Supreme Court. And it's not clear when the appeals court will rule. But again, this is only one of at least 5 or 6 cases that are trying to seek to hold Donald Trump liable for that speech and other conduct which plaintiffs say incited the January 6th riots.
And Ken, to that end, the Justice Department special counsel is also investigating whether Trump can be criminally charged over efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. So does this filing have any bearing on that investigation?
It may to some extent, but there aren't the similar kinds of impediments because this criminal investigation, Donald Trump's no longer president, so he certainly has no immunity from criminal prosecution for actions that he took. There may be some assertions of some kind of presidential immunity, and this position by the Justice Department may impact some of those. We'll just have to wait and see, Zinkley.
Cases to watch. Ken Delanian, thank you so much.
Now to Ohio and new developments in the investigation into last month's toxic train derailment. President Biden announced plans to eventually visit the site of the disaster. This as we learn from federal investigators what may have caused the crash. NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest.
After saying last week that he had no plans to visit East Palestine, President Biden now says that he plans to do so at some point, although he did not elaborate as to when.
As crews scramble to clean up this creek in East Palestine, Ohio, the NTSB says it's concerned aluminum protective covers on the rail cars melted, possibly contributing to the train derailment. After facing criticism for not traveling to the site, President Biden said he'd visit at some point.
I've spoken with every official in Ohio, Democrat and Republican.
East Palestine has now become ground zero for environmental activism nationwide.
They're being misled. They're not being told the truth.
Erin Brockovich, of course, became a household name after exposing California groundwater contamination in the 90s, which led to an Oscar-winning movie about her life.
We need to hear from you.
She's now focused on what she says is an unfolding disaster here.
In 30 years, we have made absolutely no progress. We continue to do the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result.
On Capitol Hill, bipartisan senators are trying to strengthen safety measures for trains carrying hazardous materials, mandating wheels be scanned for heat every 10 miles. Norfolk Southern says it's already committed to pay out millions of dollars to affected residents.
We understand this has been a huge impact to the community, but we're working with the agencies to make sure we're doing this right.
Is that enough?
No, I'm really beginning to wonder what they're up to because it just everything here reeks.
Ashley McCollum says she's dealt with watery eyes, dizziness, and other symptoms for weeks.
Do you feel safe in East Palestine right now?
I do not. I will not bring my children back in, and if I can't stand more than a half an hour in my own home, I would not feel safe.
Many of those residents are asking Norfolk Southern for more transparency about the cleanup effort here. Back to you.
All right, Gabe, thank you so much.
And coming up on Morning News Now, a new battle taking shape in Ukraine.
This morning, Russian forces are closing in on a key eastern city. Plus, President Vladimir Putin convenes a meeting on national security. We'll bring you the latest after the break.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is convening a National Security Council meeting this morning to discuss yesterday's attack in the Russian region of Bryansk near the Ukrainian border.
Moscow blames the attack on a Ukrainian sabotage group, but Kyiv has denied any involvement in the incident. NBC News reporter Matt Bodner joins us now with this and the latest on the war in Ukraine. So, Matt, what is the Kremlin alleging here about this attack, and what is Ukraine saying about it?
Joe and Clay, good morning. So we're actually hearing a lot of things from the Russian side, also the Ukrainian side as well. But just to break it down, at the Kremlin level, we've heard basically this morning they're still trying to evaluate the situation. Meanwhile, the FSB, the Russian Federal Security Service, has come out with a video that they claim shows the site of an attack committed by what they say are Ukrainian nationalists who committed an incursion into 2 villages over the Russian side of the border. But there's a lot of kind of very murky details. It's very difficult to understand what, if anything, exactly happened there. Ukraine has denied any responsibility, but we did see an interesting remark from a Ukrainian official yesterday, kind of hinting that Russia needs to worry about Russian partisans now operating within Russia. And this came after a claim from a third party involved in this incident, or at least allegedly involved in this incident, calling themselves the Russian Volunteer Corps. And this appears to be a group affiliated with far-right figures from the European far-right movement. So there's a lot of questions about what exactly happened. Suffice it to say, the Kremlin is acting on this. Yesterday, we saw Vladimir Putin kind of give us a taste of how he's treating the incident, saying that Ukrainian nationalists attacked civilians, opened fire on a car with a child in it. And then we heard about a special national security meeting being convened yesterday. That has been pushed to today. We're actually hearing from the Kremlin this morning. They're downplaying, however, this national security meeting, insisting that it's routine, it's scheduled, but we're kind of waiting now to see whether or not Vladimir Putin is going to commit to some of the narratives that we saw floating around from the Russian side yesterday, or if they're going to take a step back for a little bit.
And Matt, I want to switch focus on the events on the battlefield for a moment, in particular the eastern city of Bakhmut, the location of some of the fiercest fighting in recent weeks. We know the Russian mercenary group, the Wagner group, has been heavily involved in that space. What's the latest?
So this morning we actually saw the head of the Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, come out with a video claiming that his forces, Russian forces, have surrounded the Ukrainians who have been trying to hold those positions in and around Bakhmut, saying that there's basically just one road left in and out. Now, this account is disputed already from some voices on the Ukrainian side, claiming that they're continuing to hold their ground, though there is some signaling that they may be preparing a retreat. We've seen in recent weeks Ukrainian officials from Zelensky on down signal that they weren't willing to pay an excessive price for Bakhmut, though, of course, they are trying to hold that line. They've been on the offensive for so long now. And the Russians have made it quite clear, or at least the Wagner group and Yevgeny Prigozhin have made it quite clear, that Bakhmut is a prize that they really want to take. And there's going to be, I think, a lot of morale-boosting effect from that if Russia seizes the town, if Wagner seizes the town. But we're kind of in that fog of war stage with the exact situation in Bakhmut this morning.
Now we understand President Biden is hosting German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the White House. It's a private meeting amid plans for more military aid to Ukraine. Do we know what's on the agenda there?
So obviously this is Scholz's first visit to Washington in more than a year, and a lot has happened over the past year. And we've seen at times disagreement between the U.S. and Germany on sort of the scale and form of aid given to Ukraine, particularly military aid. Obviously, there was just that major decision taken by both sides to provide, top-of-the-line tanks to the Ukrainian armed forces, Leopards from Germany, Abrams from the United States. So I think it's safe to assume that a lot of that discussion today is going to focus on further synchronizing U.S. and German positions on Ukraine aid deliveries. But there's also a new factor that has entered the mix, that, of course, being the concern coming up this week that China is at least considering supporting Russia militarily or materially with military aid to continue their war effort. Of course, there's reports on the Russian side that they're facing equipment shortages. China is actually Germany's #1 trade partner, so there's definitely an effort here, I think, to try to message to the Chinese not to go ahead with this decision.
All right.
Back to you guys.
Matt Bodner. Matt, thank you.
Thank you. And coming up, cancer concerns. More people being diagnosed with a serious form of cancer at a young age. The alarming report just released, and the advice now from doctors.
Also, help for the homeless, how one doctor is reaching out to those most in need. Up next on Morning News Now. We're back with an update on the controversial bills targeting the LGBTQ community in Tennessee. Gender-affirming surgeries and hormone treatments for young people are now banned in the state after Governor Bill Lee signed the bill into law on Thursday. A second bill signed into law yesterday also bans, quote, adult cabaret performances in public places, including male and female impersonators. Well, it does not specifically ban drag shows. LGBTQ advocates say the law's wording is intentionally vague and will severely impact performers in the state. It is the first law of its kind in the U.S. Both those laws go into effect on July 1st.
In health news, it's colorectal cancer awareness month, and there's some alarming new data about colon cancer.
A report just released by the American Cancer Society says more people are being diagnosed with the disease at a younger age. And in many cases, when it's diagnosed, the cancer is already at a dangerous stage.
Dr. Cedric McFadden joins us now, a general surgeon and a clinical assistant professor of surgery. Thank you so much for being here, and good morning. So first, can you tell us more about this cancer and what some of the symptoms are?
So this is a disease of the large intestines, and fortunately our body lets us know when there's a problem with it. So our body will send us signs and symptoms that many people often disregard or ignore, or they bring it to their doctor's attention and nothing's done about it. So these include problems like having blood in the stool, or having abdominal discomfort or pain, changes in the bowel habits, unexplained weight loss, or even weakness or fatigue. And as you can imagine, just because you have these signs or symptoms, it doesn't mean you have colon cancer, but it does mean we need to do more evaluation by talking with your doctor to figure out exactly what's going on.
This trend of younger people getting it is especially concerning because younger folks don't get regular screenings. But first of all, I mean, do we know what could be causing this trend of more people under the age of 55 being diagnosed with the disease at more advanced stages?
So I wish we knew exactly what caused it. There are some things that we are considering. Obviously, having risk factors such as having more people that are obese, heavy alcohol consumption, and eating more red meat or an unhealthy diet can certainly contribute. But there are many healthy people that we see that are doing all the right things that are still getting diagnosed. So what is it? A lot of the research is centered around the environmental factors, whether there are factors in the environment that are influencing this gut microbiome or all the microorganisms that live in our intestines. Could that then be influencing? But the short answer is we don't know. I think the take-home message is regardless, whenever you see signs or symptoms, regardless of your age, you need to be tested.
And Dr. McFadden, you talked about lifestyle changes just now that people can make to keep this cancer away. But in terms of demographics, who should get screened for this cancer, and at what age should they start these screenings?
So average risk should begin screening at the age of 45. All right, so if you have a family history of colorectal cancer, you should begin screening sooner, perhaps 10 years before that family member was affected. So mom was 42 when she was diagnosed, you need to begin screening at the age of 32. And if you have certain other medical conditions like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, you also need to begin screening sooner. There are some people that are also at high risk. This particular study highlighted the high risk in African Americans, also Native Americans and Alaskan Americans. They also saw higher numbers of cancers in people that lived in the South and in the Midwest. And there may be, again, as you mentioned, some lifestyle influences that may influence how that presents itself.
The fact that people are getting screened at earlier ages now, I know it's early into that, but are we starting to see, even if not, even anecdotally, that we're catching things earlier in a lot of younger patients?
Well, I know I am. And this particular study also highlighted that age group from 45 to 49 that had about a 43% cases of cancer in that group. I see patients that are in their early 40s. The youngest patient I have is probably in their 20s that's been diagnosed with colorectal cancer. So this is a disease that can affect any of us, regardless of your gender, regardless of your age. We have to make sure that we're, first of all, getting people screened, and that we're also having people understand their symptoms and bring it to the attention of their doctors, and their doctors have to listen. That's the other bit that we have to talk about.
Important health warning. Dr. McFadden, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now to a story about a good Samaritan healing the streets of Boston, one checkup at a time. NBC News correspondent Harry Smith has his story.
2 nights a week for 30 years, Dr. Jim O'Connell has done exactly this.
I don't remember me from before. How are you, by the way? What's going on?
Fulfilling the healer's oath with Boston's homeless. His patient this night, Michael, tells us he spent a good portion of his life in prison.
He was right here. Right there?
As his regrets spill out, O'Connell tends to the cut hand.
Thank you.
O'Connell urges Michael to come to a clinic. No telling if he'll show.
Who's out here? Who's out on the streets? Oh, it's a real mix of people. For example, about 25% of the men that we'll see out here cannot read or write.
He says most have endured significant trauma, physical, psychological. Many self-medicate, are addicted.
And little did I understand how complicated it was. And you can do a lot to ease their suffering and help them out, even though you may not end their homelessness. That's what I'm saying. I'll get you hot chocolate, too.
A classroom whiz at Notre Dame, he studied philosophy and theology, then Harvard Medical School.
You know what? People would look at that and say, why the hell is that guy out here? I don't know exactly how to answer that. I was lucky to be thrown into it and lucky that it hit the right nerves for me.
and lucky for the patients of the Boston Health Care for the Homeless program he helped build, the envy of many a city.
I love this place. It's really all I have in my life.
How are you?
O'Connell seems to have a special instinct for people at risk. His most important skill, listening, learned in his years as a bartender. His life's work featured in a new book.
Should we be more empathetic as a public? Yeah, I think that's a tall order for a public, but I would say if the public had a chance to see what we've been watching for years, you couldn't help but be empathetic.
Harry Smith, NBC News, Boston.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.